Somehow, I think that episode 2 of Exandria Unlimited Calamity is better than episode 1, and that's saying something. It feels like there's a narrative momentum that is building with each minute that the cast plays. You can just feel the story begin to enter its death spiral, especially by the end of the episode. So let's talk about some of the best moments in Exandria Unlimited Calamity episode 2. Firstly, I think it's important to talk about the moment between Sarat and his son, Talon. And apart from being adorable, like the entire scene, I think that it's important because it shows us what these characters will lose if they fail, or really, when they fail. Like Brennan said at the beginning of episode 1, this is not going to be a happy story. And we have to imagine not only all the player characters, but all the NPCs, named and unnamed, that we see and don't see, having families and lives like this. That moment between Sarat and Talon shows us why the Calamity is so devastating. It shows us the true horror, and perhaps later on why the gods had to step away behind the divine gate. Next, we have to talk about Laerin and the astral layrite that she created. Now, we learned through the episode that the astral layrite is a machine that is used to perfect interplanar travel. It works off of the same technology or arcane components like a plane shift spell. It tunes to a specific plane using an artifact or an item from the plane, and then opens a portal and travels to it. However, while the astral layrite technically succeeded in its first usage, I would also say that in reality it failed. Because as we know, it used an incredible amount of power, and in the last Impressions episode, we predicted this. We said that the high usage of power being used for the astral travel is probably something that will be siphoned. And it does not make any sense why such a large amount of power would be used in order to send such a small item through the planes. Sure, plane shift is a 7th level spell, but would it drain so much of an arcane battery? Especially the arcane battery size that we're talking about within the episode? I would say no, it does not make any sense unless something was siphoning the power. The poison in the city, Vespin Chloris. And based on what we learned later in the episode, I think that the astral layrite is the mechanism that will be used to free the betrayer gods. But next we can turn to the investigation around the cult member that snuck inside the party. And really this is where the critical nat 20s came into play for the first time in this episode. And really, the nat 20s revealed so much lore. And, sometimes the dice in a D&D game just helps you perfectly tell the story. And Xerxes' nat 20 is one of the things that did that. Firstly, I loved Brennan's explanation of what clerical magic is and how there are different levels of clerical magic. And that it is really wisdom that separates the power levels of a cleric, the understanding of the universe. And then I was absolutely shocked when Brennan talked about a god not caring about their cleric and simply puppeting them. And then there was conversation about the betrayer gods needing to make moves and just take control of this person with these infernal runes on them. And in that moment I was thinking, oh, this has to be Asmodeus, right? But by the end of the episode I think, no, this is not Asmodeus' work. Or, if it is Asmodeus' work, it's not by Asmodeus' choice, I don't think. But then again, Asmodeus is the father of lies and extremely manipulative, so I don't know yet. It could be Asmodeus still, but I'm leaning more towards not. We then talked about the schism between the prime deities and the betrayer gods, specifically how the fracture occurred when the prime deities gave divine magic to mortals. The betrayer gods didn't like that, and there was a fight. They were sealed away. But because of this sealing, the betrayers now couldn't really grant spells to their clerics. Yet, we are seeing these puppets essentially casting spells, which at that moment kind of set off the alarm bells that one or more are loose. But the puppet was only using limited magic. First and second level spells really didn't have a lot of health, so it would line up with the betrayer gods being stuck in this weird limbo dimension. It was then that the party began to investigate how this cultist got in and realized that it was Lucretia Hollow who brought in this disguised cultist as a mole. She's also the person who invited Pervon to the party. She left a gift of poison that is essentially supposed to be taken at the end as a mercy, so the people wouldn't have to experience the calamity, or the Ring of Brass wouldn't need to experience the calamity. Continuing on with the investigation, Paisha kind of interrogates Madara, and with a detect thoughts begins to comb through a sloppy and quick modify memory that was placed on Madara. It was then that we begin to learn that Lucretia was about to kill Pervon before he was talked to at the end of the last episode. So it seems like the followers of the betrayers, or at least the people who are trying to unleash the betrayers, are trying to set the stage for the betrayers' eventual arrival. The killing of the Raven Queen's champion, who has been snooping around and knows that something is going on, feels like one of those things that they were doing to try to make sure that they can complete whatever ritual they're up to. And another important thing to note is that Madara, as she was watching this all happen, saw that it was Lucretia who was casting the spell, or beginning to cast the spell to try to kill Pervon, but it was Magister Mika Cormorant, a high-ranking member generally in the government of Avalar. So now we have another high-ranking accomplice in this massive conspiracy going on in the city. And at this point, the episode kind of splits.
Hey everyone, before continuing with the video, I just want to give a shout out to the channel's affiliate and sponsor, Only Crits. Only Crits is an online store that specializes in dice sales and 5e adventure modules. They also carry in stock dice trays and other assorted D&D accessories. I personally love their spell scroll dice trays and their duck dice. I mean, look guys, they're ducks in dice. If that's not gonna sell you, I don't know what is. They also have other little small friends, like chickens or pandas. If you're looking for a fun one-shot, I'd recommend The Emperor's End, or if you're looking for a full adventure, I'd recommend The Mountain Killer. It's a short adventure only running from levels 4 to 6, but it packs a lot of epic adventure and mystery in those short 3 levels. And it's set up so that you can drag and drop this plot into your homebrew adventures really easily. I've got an affiliate link in the description below, and if you enter the code DUNGEON, you will get a discount on your order. If you want awesome dice, accessories, or adventure modules, check out my friends at Only Crits. And now, back to the video.
As the party goes off to 3 different locations. One being to the Herald's Tome to look at the records, and that's done by Loquacious and Seret. To Cormorant's office, and that's done by Paisha and Laerin. And finally, a trip to the Hall of Prophecy, done by Nidas and Xerxes. So first, let's talk about Loquacious and Seret as they're going through the records in the Herald's Tome. And here we learn a bit more about Vespin Chloris. Firstly, based on some records and interviews, it's probably likely that when he was trying to conduct this ritual, it might have been for information or knowledge, but it might have been for a good reason as well, because he talked about dethroning a betrayer god. And why would you want to dethrone a good prime deity, a god that generally helps? Why not dethrone an evil? So in this way, something either went really wrong or really right. And this is where I have a theory, which is that there are many of these high-ranking mages that probably feel the same way as Vespin. The prime deities are fine. They're basically mortals plus, and that anything that the gods can do, the city of Avalar and its mages can accomplish as well. But the one thing that they need to overcome is these betrayer gods, these beings that have introduced evil into the world, and they are the ones that should be dethroned. Considering what we know about the betrayer gods in this limbo dimension right now, wouldn't it make sense if these powerful mages who were attempting to dethrone the betrayer gods kicked them all out of the prison so that they were, I guess, in a weakened state in this limbo before trying to usurp them? Now, this would be a terrible coup, and it might come down to the party to decide whether to unleash the betrayer gods or to allow these new gods to be born. And here's the thing, the sneaky thing that Brennan Lee Mulligan has been pulling. We have met the Lord of the Nine, but we have not heard a name. Even when asked his name, he just says betrayer or sinner. Consider this. Consider what if these individuals, these mages, become the betrayer gods. The betrayer gods didn't escape. The betrayer gods were dethroned and destroyed. What if that is the future? I think that there is a possible ending of this campaign where, because we don't hear specific betrayers. Sam even asked for a specific list of who are the betrayers, but we never get names because, and this is another plot point that's brought up over and over again, when a god is dethroned, when their title is taken, all names and records of them are erased. Brennan would never say the name. He could never really say the name of the previous god because then it would be in people's minds. What I think is going on is that Brennan Lee Mulligan is just dancing around this problem, dancing around this issue, dancing around the future of this campaign of Calamity, because that's the ritual. The ritual is not just to become a god, but to take the place of all the betrayer gods. Whether they succeed or not, that's up to the campaign. But this is definitely a potential avenue that I think we're kind of going down. Because if you then remember, Sarah begins to read the lips of Vespin Chloris in kind of this video archive that they have. And Vespin seems to know a lot, and he says this, that the City of Crowns bears the Tree of Names. Based on, again, later information, we learn the druids of the Gau Dressari will not even tell the city of Avalar what the Tree of Names does. But I think I know what it does, because, again, remember the names. Remember that the matron mother, that the Raven Queen existed in Avalar, talked to Paisha. The Raven Queen lived in Avalar, and she was one of the only ones, or she was the only one that rose to godhood and could dethrone a god. And after this, the Gau Dressari ordered that the Tree of Names be, protected, guarded even better by the Arboreal Calyx. That Tree of Names, the tree that we see in episode 1 being held out to Evandrin. Such an important tree. And Vespin knows about the Tree of Names. And I think that with this tree, its usage is probably to institute who has what domain. It literally gives the names of things throughout the universe. If you swap the names of dog and cat, that happens on a universal existential level. And now, throughout all of time, basically, dogs and cats are switched. But let's say I go back to campaign 1 of Critical Role. What if I switch the names of Vex and Vax? Well then, I would think that Vex would become a rogue, and Vax would become a ranger, because names carry weight in Exandria. They are these ancient and primordial things. So what if you switch the name of yourself and a god, and all those years of mortality come flooding back to the god as you now take their place on that throne? That's what I think the Tree of Names is capable of, and that's how I think that the matron mother, the Raven Queen, was able to accomplish what she did, because she used the Tree of Names. Vespin will attempt to use the Tree of Names, and when he does it, he and probably many other surviving mages, or maybe just him, will attempt to dethrone a god by taking their name. That is how you take another god's domain. You never be able to do it without that tree. And it's because the druids realized that the Raven Queen figured it out that they gave it more protection. And we also learn here in the Herald's Tome that Evandrin had something to do with all this, and Loquacious Seelie is definitely not what they appear to be. Loquacious is so deceptive throughout this entire episode, and I think is blatantly lying to many of these characters. Sam himself has said in the past, "I have no secrets," and Brennan just looks at him with a look. I rewatched the first episode of Are You Kidding Me? I wouldn't be surprised if Loquacious is working with Vespin. Or I wouldn't be surprised if Loquacious is holding back a tremendous secret or secrets from the rest of this party. But now we need to talk about the Magister's office. Paisha and Laerin basically break down the door to the Magister's office, and then Laerin, with a well-placed fireball, takes care of Magister Coromont before he can really do anything. While I agree it's a bit of a loss, they still found a lot of, I would say, useful information inside the overall office. We learn that the Magister was definitely dabbling in infernal runes in one of the teleportation circles, and we also find a letter from the Gao Dressari, the head druid of the Dressari. And like we kind of talked about previously, the Dressari say that they cannot trust the people of Avalar with the purpose of the Tree of Names, which I agree with. These wizards would absolutely abuse the tree. Heck, the people in this party would abuse the tree. Avalar is a city that does not know limit or restraint. And if you could change the very fabric of the universe, the people of Avalar would be doing that on a daily basis. I have literally no idea why the druids placed that tree in Avalar. That feels like maybe a bit of a misstep. Like, I would want the Tree of Names to be locked in a vault deep underground, so far away from these wizards that they just forget about the tree and never care about it ever again. But now we have to go to the Hall of Prophecy now, with Nidas and with Xerxes. And the time in the Hall of Prophecy, I think that this part of the episode was maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, somewhere in that time frame, and it is some of the best DMing and some of the most fun that I've ever had watching a live stream D&D campaign. It is so good, and I've rewatched this moment, this section of the episode multiple times. So, investigation into the Hall of Prophecy begins. We learn that the oracles have begun to go mad. This disease of madness has begun to spread, and the apprentice of Eldamir the Wise, Velusia, part of the Ring of Gold, went to try and help. However, she did not. In fact, the corruption within the Hall of Prophecy caused her maybe to go mad, as she renounced all magic forever, broke her staff, and left. And she had a very interesting quote: "If these gifts harm us, then we should not take them." What are these gifts? Is it magic? Is it an artifact? What could she be referring to? At this point, I don't know for sure. It could be one of 5 or 6 different things that she could be referring to. But Nidas and Xerxes split up into essentially 2 different investigations. Nidas goes and checks out a bathroom where an incident of madness occurred with the first oracle to go bad, Carwin. Then Xerxes actually begins to go to check on the mad oracle. And as Nidas goes and checks out the bathroom, he notices something: a shattered mirror. And this is important because if you remember at the end of episode 1, when Vespin tried to reach out to Seret, the mirror shattered. I think this is Brennan confirming to us that it is Vespin and Vespin's power and abilities that are driving these oracles mad. It is Vespin who is helping to provide them with these quote-unquote false prophecies. Or at least whatever force that might even be controlling Vespin is then helping to give these prophecies. But now we go to Xerxes and his investigation of the oracle, who seems fine, but with a divine sense he feels an intense, a more powerful fiendish presence than he could ever possibly feel coming from behind this wall of water. And he looks down and he sees the Lord of the Nine Hells, what we think to be Asmodeus, on the bed, although he seems incredibly injured. And so he goes to the wall of water and he steps through it, apparently walking through time. And on the other side, he heals the Lord of the Nine and begins to talk with, I'm gonna call him Asmodeus, but I don't know if he's Asmodeus or not. And we get so much lore in this section, and I want to break it down, because Asmodeus adds evil into the world. And I think that we all have to understand that while Brennan plays Asmodeus as sympathetic, he is not a good character. You see, Brennan Lee Mulligan studied philosophy, and going through this entire campaign, he is dealing with a philosophical concept called the problem of evil. And the question is usually asked, if there is evil in the world and benevolent gods, how does that work? It seems like there's a conflict. And yes, Asmodeus' response is that he wanted to improve the creation, but there's 2 types of problems of evil. Actually, there's more, but 2 main types. The logical problem of evil, just if there are good gods who care about, humanity, then why is there evil? But there's a secondary one that acknowledges that you need the opposite. in order to know what you have. But this evidential problem of evil states that, yes, while there is evil in the world, it does not match the degree. The argument is essentially that there is too much evil. Yes, while this evil has its purpose, why create so much of it? And the Lord of the Nine says it. I mean, he is the father of lies. He propagates all this in the world, and why propagate so much? Does it all fall to mortals? No, that's ridiculous. There is innate evil within the world, the universe of Exandria. These dark forces that operate apart from any mortals. While yes, mortal beings do create evil in the world, and you have to have that opposite in order for them to choose to be good, to heighten the sweetness of being honorable, being trustworthy, etc. We also have to acknowledge that not all evil in Exandria comes from mortal choices. Many of these evils come from other outside sources. Asmodeus is sympathetic, but he is by no means innocent. And I'm astounded by the amount of philosophical depth that Brennan is putting into these betrayer gods in this situation. Because yes, while Asmodeus is evil, and I don't really think there's dispute in that he is evil, or this Lord of the Nine is evil, I don't think that they're the antagonist of this campaign. They are but a cog in this machine, like everyone else. And then the betrayal happens. The betrayal where the prime deities attempted to take more from the primordials. And I think it's important to realize that Asmodeus and the other betrayers understand that the world of Exandria is not their world. The primordials had it first, and their generosity in allowing the prime deities to stay and create is a good. But for the prime deities to then be bestowing so much power onto mortals, that does seem like an overreach. And you know what? The prime deities, the title that they themselves gave to their group, always did look down on the quote-unquote betrayers. Was it right for the prime deities to give this divine magic? I think that's a very gray question, but whatever the case, they're not innocent because they did attempt to overstep. And you know what? They did punish the betrayer gods beyond what was needed. Because let's just look at it if a human was dealt these conditions that the betrayer gods were dealt. A person tries to tell their government that they are overreaching with an action, maybe a new law. They say that it will hurt the local ecosystem maybe, and that the law shouldn't be passed. They protest. They try to stop this action. Heck, they might even come to arms to try to stop this governmental action. But they lose. Now what should happen? Let's say you decide that they need to be thrown in prison. That's fine. You know, the punishment for prison is the confinement, not being able to leave the space. In modern prisons, especially across the European Union, it is thought that you then help to rehabilitate the prisoner. So then why the fuck did the prime deities decide to torture the betrayer gods? Because looking at the Lord of the Nine Hells, he talks about how he was burning, how he was being punished. Brennan did everything but say the word torture. These betrayer gods were being tortured. They were being quote-unquote taught a lesson. The Lord of the Nine can feel pain, he just doesn't die. If those mortal prisoners were being tortured and held in confinement, we would say it was inhumane. We would say that their human dignity, their human rights are being violated. And that's what's happening, or that's what happened to the betrayer gods. And that's where the line, "They called us betrayers," screamed out by the Lord of the Nine, has so much impact. They called the betrayer gods betrayers because they stood with the original pact with the primordials. They called the betrayer gods betrayers because they wanted to abide by the original deal. They didn't want to keep on overreaching with their power. Is divine magic good for mortals? Maybe, and that's the thing. For every good cleric like Pike or Jester or Caduceus, you have these other dark clerics that now exist in the world of Exandria. The betrayer gods were named betrayers, but while they are not innocent, not by a long shot, and Xerxes even brings this up to Asmodeus, saying that in their rage, they took out their anger on the mortals around them, their children, really, the prime deities, are by no means innocent either. And now we can start to see the hate from Xerxes begin to boil over. The loathing that the people of Avalar have for the gods kinda is justified. They don't know what the gods did, but I bet with these prime deities walking around Exandria that some of that arrogance definitely has to come through. And so after learning about the imprisonment of the betrayer gods, we also learn that Asmodeus and the other betrayers are trapped in limbo, and that the ritual's not done. It's probably not done by a long shot, as they're still going to get released, but they were forced out of their imprisonment. They did not try to escape. Now, that's what Asmodeus tells us, and he's the father of lies. But I don't put it past Brennan Lee Mulligan to have Asmodeus be lying throughout this entire conversation. But from a narrative perspective, with only, 4 episodes in Calamity in total, I don't think it makes sense, and I don't think that Brennan Lee Mulligan would push that button to have Asmodeus just be completely lying through this entire thing. I think somehow the father of lies is actually just telling the truth throughout this entire conversation. And I think that's why this appeals to Xerxes, because Asmodeus is, in this moment, very human, very mortal. He's not holier than thou and is genuinely trying to help. And that's why Xerxes doesn't pull away from Asmodeus. That's why Xerxes asks that he and all the others not be forgotten, and Asmodeus gives his word. And this right here is what really kind of sealed the deal for me with Asmodeus, because Asmodeus says that he will not in all the universe and all of time forget Xerxes. And at least in regular D&D canon, Asmodeus, when he gives his word, holds to his word. That's why the devils have contracts. Because devils don't really lie. They tell you exactly what they're going to do. Now, you might misunderstand what they're saying, but they don't lie. And in this moment, after being helped by Xerxes, I don't think that Asmodeus would lie at all. And then his protection spell, protection from evil and good, certainly, man, I'm trying to find the word, lends to his credibility, maybe? Because throughout this entire conversation, we see that Asmodeus is very empathetic, and he actually has quite a huge heart. He loves the world of Exandria. He loves the people, and he wants to protect them. The evil that Asmodeus brought into the world was for what he thought was the betterment of everyone around him. Again, it doesn't excuse his actions or his nature, but it's also showing that Asmodeus isn't a sadist. He's not trying to go around and create suffering for suffering's sake. And the final point where this is brought up is when Asmodeus, or the Lord of the Nine, whoever he is, says that there's a poison in the city that's infecting everything, and that there are so many lies around Xerxes right now. Obviously, he's referring here to Vespin. He's referring to the Magister. He's referring to Lucretia Hollow, as we see at the end of the episode. He's probably referring to Loquacious and at least a few other members of this party. The fall is coming, which kind of segues into the first prophecy that is brought to Knidos. And we learn that this prophecy is not false, because it says that Avalar will fall. It says that all cities will fall, and that the gods will leave their broken world, their broken creation, which all happens. And this was declared false by the government. The arrogance, like we said in the last video, is what has doomed Avalar. They had weeks warning and simply chose to disregard the prophecy. The head of divination just simply said that it was false because it will never happen. They saw the warning signs, they got the prophecies, and they chose to ignore everything. And honestly, that is the moment where I was just crushed, because they knew all of this. I bet you that Loquacious probably knew all this as well. Basically, how many people knew? How many people knew that these prophecies were coming out, and then just elected to ignore them? And then the episode begins its ending as the helmswoman of the entire city of Avalar contacts Laerin and says that they were descending Everything's going well, and then is promptly murdered. As the Ring of Brass begins to rush to the helm to try to help, they are ambushed by Lucretia Hollow and a bunch of goons on nearby rooftops. And now we wait for the third part of Exandria Unlimited Calamity. But until then, I recommend watching this video right here, and thank you for entering the dungeon.